After Christmas night, I woke up in an empty house, the silence pressing in so heavy it almost rang in my ears. The tree was still lit in the corner, twinkling over half-opened presents and crumpled wrapping paper, but the laughter that had filled these rooms just hours before was gone. At first, I thought maybe everyone had slipped out for a morning errand, maybe to grab breakfast or coffee, but as I walked from room to room, calling their names, I realized the truth. Every suitcase was missing. Every coat from the hallway gone. Even the car from the driveway had vanished. My heart pounded as I checked my phone, expecting messages, some kind of explanation, but there was nothing. Only silence and an old group chat filled with smiling pictures from the night before. It was as if the people I had loved, trusted, and celebrated with had dissolved into the air. And then, when I checked my brother's social media and saw them posting pictures from an airport lounge, laughing, champagne glasses in hand, boarding passes flashing in their stories, I froze. They had left me behind deliberately, while they flew to a luxury resort for a family vacation. And in that moment, standing barefoot in my pajamas, surrounded by discarded ribbons and broken candy canes, I felt something burn through me. Not just betrayal, something colder, sharper. Because what they didn't know, as they smiled for those pictures, was that I had already uncovered their biggest secret, and soon it wouldn't be them laughing. It would be me. I stood there, staring at my brother's post, his smug grin framed by the kind of luxury most people only dream about. The boarding passes stamped first class, the champagne already half drunk, the caption reading, "Finally, family time without the drama." My hands shook, not because I was crying, but because of the kind of betrayal that hardens you instantly, like steel left out in the cold. Family time. Without me. That line carved its way into my chest, reminding me of every holiday where I had been the one cleaning up after their messes, every birthday where my gift was brushed aside while theirs was paraded as perfect, every secret conversation that fell silent the second I entered the room. They didn't just leave me. They made a choice, calculated and cruel, to enjoy luxury while erasing me like I was nothing. I wandered through the house, the echo of my own footsteps mocking me in rooms that still smelled of cinnamon and pine. Stockings still hung over the fireplace, but mine was empty, as if they had ripped the meaning out of it overnight. I opened. The fridge and the leftovers sat there like ghosts of a night that suddenly felt staged, like I'd been the punchline all along. But here's the thing. While they thought they were discarding me, while they clinked glasses in an airport lounge, I had already discovered something they didn't want me to know, a secret they thought was buried too deep to ever see daylight. I had stumbled on it weeks earlier, while wrapping gifts in my father's study, when I found the envelope that wasn't supposed to exist. Inside were bank statements, receipts, and a name I didn't recognize tied to accounts that looked far too polished to be legitimate. I had put it back carefully and said nothing, but I kept a copy. And now, as they jetted off on their luxury escape, laughing at the idea of a Christmas without me, I realized the timing couldn't be more perfect. They had left me alone, but what they really did was leave me free. Free to decide how this story was going to end. I sat at the kitchen table, the cold wood pressing into my elbows as I spread out the photocopies I had made weeks ago. At first, I hadn't understood what I was looking at. Numbers scattered across pages, transfers to names I didn't know, accounts overseas. But the more I studied, the clearer it became. My family had been hiding money, funneling it away, while pretending we were just getting by. They made me feel guilty every time I asked for help, every time I needed something as basic as a car repair or a dental bill covered, while all along they were secretly playing a much bigger game. I remembered my mother's voice just last week, telling me, "You know, you should be more grateful. We do everything for you." While she wore a necklace I now realized had been purchased with money skimmed from these accounts. My father's long business trips, the ones that left me home to babysit and cover chores, suddenly looked different too. He wasn't just working, he was covering tracks, and I had proof. Scrolling through my phone again, I watched them boarding the plane, their smiles widening, not knowing I was staring at evidence that could shatter everything. They thought I was excluded, abandoned, forgotten. But what they didn't understand was that they had handed me silence, time, and a house full of clues. I opened drawers, checked desks, found little slips they had been careless with, receipts from jewelers, invoices for trips I hadn't been told about, credit card statements that linked back to those same hidden accounts. I started piecing it together like a puzzle, each corner locking into place until the picture was undeniable. My family wasn't just selfish, they were dirty. That realization didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. Instead, it steadied me. My hands stopped. Shaking, my breath slowed, and something like clarity settled over me. They had left me behind because they thought I was powerless, the quiet one, the afterthought. But I wasn't. I was the one holding their secret in my hands. And while they were clinking glasses above the clouds, I was deciding what to do with the truth that could burn down everything they had built. The house felt like a stage set after the actors had left, lights still on but no one performing. I walked into the living room and stared at the family portrait above the mantel. It was from 3 years ago, taken on a beach in Mexico. Everyone was laughing, tanned, arms linked together. Everyone but me. I remembered that trip. I had stayed. Home. Told there wasn't enough money for another ticket. That maybe next time I could come if I saved up. Back then, I believed them. I worked double shifts during the holidays, sent money to cover groceries, and convinced myself I was being a good daughter, a good sister. Looking at that photo now, I realized they had already decided who was in the family circle and who was expendable. I was the ghost in their story. But ghosts see everything. And while they were flaunting luxury trips and pretending I didn't exist, I was holding documents that could ruin them. The name that kept repeating across the papers, an offshore entity tied directly to my father, wasn't just a shell. It connected to property I didn't know we owned, expensive assets bought under other names, and investments hidden from taxes. They had cut me out not because I was difficult or dramatic, but because they feared I might stumble into this truth and claim what was mine. I wasn't imagining it anymore. The proof was stacked right in front of me. I thought about calling them, about demanding answers while they sat on their beach chairs, cocktails in hand. But then I pictured my mother's dismissive laugh, my brother's smirk, my father's calm, "You're exaggerating again" tone. No. They would twist it, gaslight me, make me the problem like always. They had already abandoned me without a second thought. Why give them the power of hearing my hurt? So instead, I opened my laptop. I drafted an email, attaching scans of the documents, addressed not to them, but to a lawyer I had quietly reached, out to weeks before, just in case. My finger hovered over the send button. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what was stolen, about no longer being the afterthought left behind in an empty house after Christmas. They wanted to erase me from their perfect family narrative, but I was about to write myself back in, permanently. I didn't hit send right away. Instead, I sat there in the glow of the Christmas tree lights, the ornaments catching glints of gold like silent witnesses. My stomach twisted, not from fear, but from the weight of all the years I had swallowed my voice. I thought back to the nights I had skipped meals so my little brother could have seconds, the birthdays I spent alone because they forgot, the way I was always the one expected to sacrifice so they could shine. Every cut I had endured quietly now added fuel to the fire building inside me, and this time, I wasn't going to be quiet. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through their vacation photos. My brother was already shirtless on a yacht, flashing that arrogant grin, captioning it, "Family only." My mother posed in oversized sunglasses, holding a designer bag I recognized from one of the receipts I had just uncovered. My father, always reserved, had a glass of whiskey in his hand. But even in that photo, I could see it. The pride of a man who thought he had gotten away with everything. My blood boiled, but alongside the anger, a strange calm washed over me. They were careless, flaunting what they thought was untouchable, while the one they had dismissed was sitting in the middle of their fortress holding the detonator. I gathered everything I could find. Receipts, documents, emails. They all went into a neatly organized folder on my computer. I made backups on 2 separate drives, one hidden in my room and another sent to a cloud account they didn't know existed. If they tried to erase me, I would erase their lies instead. I wasn't bluffing. I had proof, and I was determined to use it. By the time I pressed send to my lawyer, my hands were steady. The silence of the house no longer felt suffocating. It felt like space, like freedom. For the first time in years, I realized I didn't need their approval, their scraps, or their vacations to feel worthy. I had power now, and I intended to wield it. As the email whooshed out of my inbox, I whispered to myself, almost like a vow, "Merry Christmas." They thought they had celebrated without me, but soon enough, they'd realize that the real party had just begun, and I was the one writing the guest list. The next morning, I woke up to a cold house and a colder reality, but this time I didn't feel small or abandoned. I felt awake. The documents I had uncovered weren't just numbers and names. They were leverage, a map of all the lies they had woven over the years. Every transaction told a story. Every hidden account whispered of a secret they had hoped would never see. Daylight. I brewed coffee in the quiet kitchen, and for once the silence wasn't painful. It was mine. I sipped slowly, almost savoring the image of them in their resort, probably laughing over a breakfast buffet, convinced they had cut me out, once and for all. But the truth was, I was no longer the outsider. I was holding the keys to their carefully guarded empire, and with one click, I had already set events in motion. My lawyer had replied within hours, sharper than I expected. "This is serious. We'll need to meet. Don't speak to them directly. Keep everything secure." Those words grounded me, reminding me this wasn't a fantasy of revenge but a legal path to justice. The kind of path that ends in courtrooms, with judges, with public records, no Instagram filter could erase. I thought about what it would mean when their friends, the same ones who praised our perfect family, learned the truth. When the neighbors who envied their cars and vacations discovered it was all built on fraud and betrayal, their glossy world would shatter, and I wouldn't even have to raise my voice. I spent the day searching every corner of the house, uncovering more pieces of their deception. An old locked drawer in my father's office gave way to a spare key hidden behind a shelf, and inside I found contracts, property deeds, even correspondence with someone overseas. Every page I photographed, every letter I cataloged. By evening, the folder had grown thick with evidence, an entire case laid out by the very people who had underestimated me. And as I worked, I thought about every moment they had belittled me, every time they had called me ungrateful, dramatic, or too sensitive. They had spent years training me to believe I was powerless, that my role was to endure and stay quiet. But I wasn't quiet now. That night, as the snow fell outside and the world seemed wrapped in holiday stillness, I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling. I pictured them lying under palm trees, drinks in hand, their skin warmed by the sun, while mine shivered under blankets. But instead of bitterness, I felt a strange satisfaction. They had left me behind to hurt me, but in doing so, they gave me the one thing they never meant to, the chance to act without interference. I was done, being their scapegoat, the forgotten one, the shadow in the corner of family photos. From this moment forward, I was the one holding the story together, and soon they would learn that leaving me behind was the biggest mistake they had ever made. The days stretched on, each one heavy with the weight of waiting, but I didn't waste them. While they lounged on a beach, sipping cocktails and snapping photos for strangers to admire, I was here turning their empire inside out. My lawyer set up a secure call, and I listened carefully as he explained just how deep this could go. "If what you've shown me checks out, this isn't just a family squabble," he said, his voice clipped, professional. "This is fraud. Tax evasion, potentially money laundering. Do you understand the scope?" I did, and though part of me still trembled at the thought of destroying my own parents, my own brother, the larger part of me remembered the look on my mother's face whenever she dismissed me, the way she always made me feel like an outsider in my own home. The loyalty I had once clung to had been severed the moment they boarded that plane without me. I began to notice just how many loose threads they had left behind. Bank statements tucked into kitchen drawers, passwords scribbled in notebooks, disguised as shopping lists but easy enough to decode. Even my brother's laptop, left behind in his hurry to catch a flight, was filled with incriminating emails. I sat at the dining table where we had once shared meals and scrolled through message after message, my stomach tightening with every new revelation. They weren't just hiding money. They were mocking the system, bragging to each other about how clever they were, how untouchable. One email from my father to my mother even joked, "As long as she doesn't find out, we're safe." She, me. My hands clenched around the laptop until my knuckles went white, and yet, through the anger, a sense of control settled over me. They had built this world on arrogance, on the assumption that I would never notice, never matter. But I noticed, and I mattered more than they ever expected. I started printing documents, filing them neatly, building binders that laid out the story of their deception step by step. It was meticulous work, but each page I slipped into a sleeve felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they had stolen. By the time New Year's Eve rolled around, the house was glowing with quiet candles, the tree still standing tall. But I didn't feel abandoned anymore. I felt like I was waiting for midnight, not for fireworks, but for a detonation they didn't see coming. They thought they were celebrating freedom from me, but what they were really doing was toasting to their own downfall. And as the clock ticked toward midnight, I raised a glass of cheap champagne alone in that empty house and whispered to the silence, "Enjoy it while you can. Next year, everything changes." On New Year's morning, I woke up to another wave of photos from them, as if they were deliberately rubbing it in. My brother on a jet ski, captioned, "Starting the year right." My mother lounging in a cabana, with a caption about deserving the best. My father holding up a glass of expensive wine, his face smug with satisfaction. I stared at those images and felt no envy anymore, only distance. It was like watching strangers flaunt a life I didn't even want, not anymore. Because what I had now was more valuable than their staged happiness. I had control of the truth. That same morning, my lawyer called again. He told me he had reviewed the files and that this case wasn't small. It was massive. "You realize," he said carefully, "if we take this forward, your family could lose everything. Assets seized, properties repossessed, accounts frozen. It won't just be embarrassment, it'll be devastation." I let his words sink in, but I didn't flinch. For years, they had lived off lies, brushing me aside like I was disposable, while building their kingdom on deception. If devastation was the price of truth, then so be it. I spent the next hours making copies of everything, mailing sealed envelopes to secure locations, even dropping one at a trusted friend's house with instructions to open it if anything happened to me. It might have been paranoid, but I knew my family well enough to understand that when cornered, they would lash out. This time, I wouldn't be the unprotected one. This time, I was 2 steps ahead. As the snow piled outside and the world around, me celebrated a new year with joy and laughter. I sat in that house and made my resolution clear. No more silence. No more shadows. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to free myself from the grip they had over my life. They had spent years convincing me I was weak, when in truth I was the only one strong enough to bring everything into the light. And while they danced on beaches and cheered to their family unity, I packed my folders into a black briefcase, zipped it shut, and set it by the door. It felt like the beginning of something irreversible, a path that once taken would never allow me to return to the version of myself they had left behind. My phone buzzed with another vacation photo, my mother smiling with diamonds around her neck. I smiled back, not with envy, but with certainty. Let them enjoy it. Their countdown had already begun. The first week of January passed in a blur of preparation. Every day I dug deeper, and every night I grew calmer, more certain of what needed to be done. The house was still empty, their absence lingering in every corner, but it no longer felt like abandonment. It felt like an opportunity. I had space to think, to plan, to breathe without their voices telling me who I was supposed to be. And in that silence, I began rewriting the story of my life. I discovered more than I ever imagined. Old tax returns hidden in dusty boxes in the attic, signed with falsified numbers. Letters from banks in cities I had never visited. Property deeds tucked between holiday decorations, like they had assumed no one would look there. I even found a small safe hidden behind a loose panel in my father's office wall. Inside were gold coins, stacks of cash wrapped in bands from foreign banks, and a leather-bound notebook filled with coded notes. I photographed everything, logged every detail. With each discovery, the picture of who my family really was became clearer, and it was nothing like the respectable image they paraded in public. Meanwhile, the lawyer moved quickly. He connected me with forensic accountants, people who knew how to unravel webs like this one. For the first time, I wasn't alone facing them. I had a team, professionals who saw the same patterns I did. They spoke in terms of evidence, prosecution, liability. They didn't care about my family's excuses, and neither did I anymore. On the 9th day of their vacation, I woke up to a news alert. The stock market had dipped, and one of the shell companies tied to my father's name was suddenly exposed in a small investigative article online. It was minor, buried under bigger headlines, but I knew it was only the beginning. The cracks were showing, and I was holding the hammer to break them wide open. That night, I lit a fire in the fireplace, poured myself a glass of wine, and watched. The flames consumed the scraps of wrapping paper still left from Christmas. It felt symbolic, the holiday they had ruined, the family they had abandoned, burning away in front of me. I thought about how they would return in a few days, waltzing through the door with tans and souvenirs, expecting me to be sulking, maybe begging for an explanation. But I wasn't going to ask. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to hand them the reality they had earned. By the time they walked back into this house, I would already have set the stage. Their accounts flagged, their names tied to evidence, their empire ready to collapse. They had left me in an empty house after Christmas, but when they came back, it wouldn't be the same house anymore. It would be the ruins of their lies, and the foundation of my freedom. On the 10th day, the phone rang. Not from them, of course not, they hadn't called once, but from my lawyer. His voice was sharper now, urgent in a way that made my chest tighten. Things are moving faster than we expected. The documents you sent are already raising red flags with authorities. I need you ready for what comes next. I listened, silent, absorbing his words like they were instructions for battle. Because that's what this had become. Not just a family feud, but a war fought in bank ledgers and legal codes instead of shouting matches. After I hung up, I looked around the house, taking in the details I used to overlook, the photographs on the walls, the trophies on the shelves, the expensive furniture they loved to brag about. Every single thing was built on secrets. They wore their wealth like armor, pretending it made them superior, pretending it made them safe. But I knew now. Wealth built on deception is a house of cards. One push, and it falls. And I was ready to push. That evening, I drafted my own letter. Not to my lawyer, not to the authorities, but to my family. It wasn't long, and it wasn't emotional. I wrote, "You thought leaving me behind was your clean escape. But while you were drinking champagne, I was gathering the truth. When you land back home, nothing will be the same. You should have remembered. I was always watching." I didn't send it. Not yet. It wasn't for them to read now. It was for them to choke on later when everything unraveled. Scrolling through their vacation photos, I noticed something almost funny. The smiles looked tighter now. My brother posted fewer captions. My mother wore the same expensive dress 2 days in a row. They didn't know yet what was coming, but maybe they sensed it. That shift in the air when luck starts running thin. I saved the photos, not out of pain anymore, but as evidence. Snapshots of their arrogance in the final days before their downfall. By the time I closed my laptop, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. I didn't need them to love me. Didn't need them to invite me. Didn't need their approval. All I needed was the truth, and I had it. They thought I would crumble alone in this house, but instead I was standing taller than I ever had. And when they came back, I wasn't going to meet them with tears. I was going to meet them with consequences. The day they were due to return, I woke up before dawn. The house was still and cold, but inside me, there was a fire burning steady. I brewed coffee and set the folders on the dining table, everything neat and deliberate. When they walked back through that door, they would expect the same old me, the quiet one, the forgotten one, the girl who took scraps and smiled. But the person they left behind after Christmas was gone. In her place stood someone they had created with their own cruelty, a woman armed with proof, patience, and nothing left to lose. By mid-morning, I got another call from my lawyer. "It's happening," he said simply. "The agencies are taking interest. You'll want to keep your distance when the storm breaks." His calmness soothed me, but it also drove home the reality. I had set things into motion that couldn't be undone. There would be no family meeting, no tidy resolution over coffee and apologies. This was going to end in audits, subpoenas, maybe even handcuffs. And strangely, I didn't flinch. I spent the day preparing the house, not for them, but for myself. I cleaned every room, boxed up things that were mine, and set aside what I wanted to take when I left. Because I knew, once they arrived and saw the look on my face, once they realized the silence wasn't shame but strategy, I wouldn't be staying here much longer. This house, these walls, this life had always been theirs, built without me, against me. But the future I was building now was mine alone. By the time the evening flight landed, I already had a plan. The car would pull up, the doors would slam, laughter and suitcases would tumble inside. They would expect me standing there waiting, maybe wounded, maybe furious. But instead, I would be gone. On the counter, I left a single envelope, empty, except for one sheet of paper with 3 words written in black ink. Check the news. I took my bag, my briefcase of evidence, and stepped out into the cold night air. As I locked the door behind me, the silence of that house no longer felt heavy. It felt like closure. Whatever happened when they opened that envelope, when their empire began to crumble, was no longer mine to carry. They had chosen this path when they chose to betray me, and now, finally, they would learn what it meant to be left behind. I didn't go far that night. I checked into a small inn on the edge of town, the kind of place no one in my family would ever think to look. The room was simple, plain white sheets, a single lamp on the nightstand, the faint smell of wood smoke drifting in from the lobby fire. But to me, it felt like freedom. I sat on the bed with my laptop open, refreshing the news over and over, waiting for the dominoes to start falling. And then, just after midnight, the first headline appeared. It wasn't huge yet, just a regional finance blog picking up on irregularities, tied to one of my father's companies. But I knew how these things worked. One spark, then another, until the fire was impossible to contain. The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Not from them. They were probably still sleeping off jet. Lag, but from alerts, notifications, whispers spreading online. More outlets were sniffing around. The names attached to the accounts I had exposed were starting to connect in databases. What had once been invisible was now glaring under a spotlight. By noon, my lawyer called again. "They're going to feel this," he said. "By the end of the week, the agencies will move. You did the right thing staying out of the house." I thanked him, my voice calm, even steady, though inside me adrenaline surged like a tide. I imagined them waking up that same morning, rolling their suitcases into the entryway, expecting to find me sulking in the kitchen. Instead, silence. Instead, an envelope on the counter with 3 words that would freeze them in place. I could almost see my mother's hand trembling as she opened it, my father's brow furrowing, my brother scoffing before he realized this wasn't a joke. They would rush to their phones, open the news, and there it would be, the first crack in the image they had spent years curating. And for once, I wouldn't be there to watch them spin excuses or hurl blame at me. They would face the truth alone, exactly as they had left me after Christmas. That evening, sitting by the window of my quiet room, I let myself feel something I hadn't in a long time: relief. They had always taught me to believe I was powerless, but the reality was the opposite. I was the one who had pulled the string that unraveled their empire. I was the one who refused to stay silent. They might try to call me, to bargain, to twist the narrative, but I was done listening. This time, it wasn't their story anymore. It was mine. 2 days later, the headlines were impossible to ignore. What had begun as whispers on finance blogs had erupted onto national sites. Words like fraud, offshore accounts, tax evasion blared in bold letters next to my family's company name. Their faces, the same ones that had smiled so smugly in vacation photos, now stared out from articles with captions about lavish spending under investigation. I scrolled through the comments section, strangers dissecting their downfall, people who once envied them now tearing apart their arrogance. And through it all, I sat in that small inn room, anonymous, unseen, but undeniably the spark that set this blaze. I knew they had landed back home because my phone started buzzing nonstop with unknown numbers. First one, then another, then texts, flooding in from relatives I hadn't spoken to in months. What happened? Did you see the news? Is this true? Not one message from my mother, my father, or my brother, not directly. They didn't want to face me yet, cowards. But I could imagine the scene in that house, my mother pacing, her hands shaking, my father on the phone trying to reach lawyers, my brother furious, demanding answers. They had expected to return to a daughter discarded, a sister erased. Instead, they came home to a battlefield already lost. By evening, the first real blow landed. Authorities froze one of their main accounts. It was reported quietly in a financial bulletin. But I knew what it meant. Panic. The empire they had built on lies was no longer theirs to control. And still, they hadn't called me. Maybe they knew. Maybe they finally understood I wasn't waiting for their scraps anymore. That night I walked outside, the air crisp and sharp with winter. The stars glittered above me, distant but steady, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was breathing fully. I wasn't just surviving, I was free. My family had always tried to convince me I was the weak one, the burden. But now the world knew the truth. They were the ones who had lived dishonestly, who had abandoned loyalty for greed. And me? I had been the one to hold the line, to tell the story they wanted buried. I went back to my room, closed the door, and let the silence wrap around me like armor. This wasn't the end, not yet. Their downfall was only beginning, and I still had choices to make. Would I step into the light and claim my role, or would I let them wonder, forever haunted by the daughter they tried to erase? Either way, I knew one thing with certainty. After Christmas night, when they chose to leave me behind, they didn't just abandon me. They created the one person strong enough to destroy everything they had built. By the end of that week, their carefully constructed facade was crumbling in public view. News anchors were dissecting my family's lavish vacations, their homes, their businesses, all lined up against charts of missing money and offshore accounts. It wasn't gossip anymore. It was investigation. Every new headline felt like another stone laid on the grave of the image they had clung to for so long. Watching it unfold, I should have felt guilt, but instead I felt clarity. I hadn't created their downfall. I had simply refused to carry their secrets any longer. They had destroyed themselves. The calls eventually came, not just from unknown numbers, but from them. My phone lit up with my mother's name first. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding not from fear but from power. For years I had picked up immediately, desperate for her approval, desperate to hear that tone of warmth I never got. This time I let it ring. Then came my father, then my brother, each one ignored. I imagined them together, shouting over one another, arguing about who would reach me first, who would convince me to stay quiet. But silence was my answer. Silence was my revenge. That night, I received an email from my lawyer. Subpoenas were being drafted. Agencies were formally taking over. It was bigger than any of us now, no longer just family business, but federal business. He wrote, "You've done everything right. Stay where you are, stay safe, and let the system work." I closed the laptop slowly, the words sinking in. For the first time, the burden wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to them, the same people who had spent a lifetime convincing me to sacrifice, to disappear, to endure. They couldn't erase me now, not from this. I thought about the girl I had been on Christmas night, sitting in a house full of lights and silence, scrolling through photos of them boarding a plane without me. She had felt abandoned, humiliated, forgotten. But now? Now I was standing on the other side of that moment. They weren't the ones holding power anymore. I was. And it wasn't rage that guided me. It was resolve. A cold, steady certainty that some betrayals can never be forgiven, and some silences are louder than any scream. The next morning, I packed my bag and checked out of the inn. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't owe them explanations anymore. As I walked through the snow to the bus stop, my breath clouding in the cold air, I realized something almost poetic. They had left me behind because they thought I was nothing. But leaving me behind was the very mistake that gave me everything. I boarded the bus, sat by the window, and watched the town fade from view, knowing the life I was leaving behind wasn't mine anymore. My story wasn't about being excluded from a vacation. It was about breaking free from a prison I hadn't even realized I was living in. Somewhere, my family was scrambling, calling, plotting, trying to salvage their empire. But their kingdom was already ashes, and I had already walked away. Whatever came next, courtrooms, trials, headlines, it wouldn't chain me down. It would free me further. They would spend years untangling the mess they created. But I was done. For the first time, the silence around me wasn't abandonment. It was peace. It was the sound of a woman finally stepping into her own power, leaving the past behind and never looking back. Weeks passed, and the storm only grew louder. My family's names filled the news, their photos plastered across every article, no longer smiling in beachside selfies, but frozen in court sketches and grainy images leaving government buildings with pale, grim faces. Their friends, the ones who had once envied them, began to distance themselves. Businesses cut ties, neighbors whispered, and the very community that once praised their success now treated them like a scandal to be dissected over coffee. I watched it all from a distance, detached but steady, as if I were watching a movie I already knew the ending to. Every headline was confirmation, every new detail a reminder that truth had finally caught up with them, and all the while, they kept reaching out. Letters appeared at the inn, emails slipped through the cracks, numbers I didn't recognize calling me day after day. They wanted me to explain, to forgive, to fix what they had broken. But I didn't answer. I had answered them my entire life, bent myself into silence, and where had it left me? Alone in a cold house after Christmas. They had chosen to erase me, and now they had to face a world that wouldn't let them erase their crimes. I sometimes wondered what they said to each other behind closed doors. Did my father rage that I had ruined him, never admitting that he had ruined himself? Did my mother cry, not from remorse, but from the loss of her status, her jewelry, her place in society? Did my brother curse me, convinced that I was jealous, rather than justified? I would never know, because I never gave them the chance to say it to my face. They had spoken over me my entire life, drowned out my voice, and I had no interest in hearing them now. My silence was louder than their screams, but it wasn't just about watching them fall. It was about rising, finally, on my own terms. I started rebuilding a life away from the wreckage. I found work that had nothing to do with them, carved out, friendships that weren't tangled in manipulation, and began saving for a place of my own. Each small step felt like a revolution. Freedom didn't come all at once. It came in those quiet mornings when I brewed coffee without dread, in evenings when I walked through streets and didn't feel like a shadow. For the first time, I felt like my life belonged to me, not to their secrets, not to their lies. And yet, even in my new life, I carried the memory of that empty Christmas morning. It had begun as the cruelest moment of my life, waking up to find myself abandoned by the very people I thought were my foundation. But that emptiness had turned into clarity. They thought they had left me with nothing, but what they really left me with was a choice, to stay small and broken, or to rise and fight. I chose the latter, and that choice became the turning point of everything. So while they scrambled in courtrooms, while their empire crumbled into dust, I sat in quiet rooms lit by soft lamps, reading books, planning futures, feeling something I never thought possible in their shadow: peace. They had built a cage and called it family, but I had stepped out of it, and the world outside was bigger and brighter than I ever imagined. And though I would never forgive them, I also knew I didn't need to. Their punishment was already written, in every headline, every forfeited property, every tear shed behind closed doors. My revenge was not in screaming, not in confrontation. It was in survival. It was in thriving. It was in proving, finally, that the one they abandoned was the only one strong enough to walk away. When the final gavel fell, it wasn't dramatic, not like in the movies. There were no outbursts, no sudden confessions, just the quiet, heavy sound of consequence settling into place. Their assets were seized, their accounts frozen, their reputations shredded beyond repair. My father, once the man who carried himself with untouchable pride, was left humbled and small, his name tied forever to fraud and deceit. My mother, who once cared more about appearances than truth, found herself shut out from the social circles she had lived for, her jewels pawned, her image broken. My brother, who had mocked me as the burden, was left scrambling, angry, unable to accept that the family empire had crumbled beneath him. They had built their kingdom on lies, and I had simply stopped holding it up. I wasn't there in court that day. I didn't need to be. I didn't need to watch them fall because I had already let them go. Instead, I was in my own small apartment in a different city, the walls bare but mine, the silence no longer a wound, but a comfort. I made coffee, watered a plant I had bought for the windowsill, and let the sunlight fill the room. The news would tell their story. I didn't have to. My story was different now. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me finally living without the weight of their shadows pressing me down. Sometimes I still think about that Christmas morning, waking up in a house so quiet it almost swallowed me whole. I remember the sting of betrayal, the way my chest ached as I realized they had left me behind. But I also remember what came after, the fire it lit inside me, the strength I discovered, the truth I chose to bring into the light. They thought they had abandoned me, but really, they had freed me. By cutting me out, they gave me the distance to see clearly, to act, to reclaim myself. I don't forgive them. I never will. Some betrayals are too deep, too deliberate to ever be washed away. But I don't need their apologies, their explanations, or their love. What I needed was to finally choose myself. And I did. They are trapped now in the ruins of their own lies, while I am free, standing in the quiet of a life that belongs only to me. So when people ask me if I regret it, if I went too far, I only smile. I didn't destroy my family. They destroyed themselves. I simply stopped pretending not to see it. And in doing so, I learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't shouting, or fighting, or even winning. Sometimes the greatest revenge is walking away, with nothing but your own freedom, and realizing it was everything you needed all along.